Thank you everyone for joining us today, and I'm really excited because we are uncovering and unraveling the Kubernetes 1.21 release with my guest for his developer advocate at HashiCorp, and he's a very active member in the Kubernetes community, Taylor Dolezal, and I'm really thankful to them to showing his time and sharing his energy of what this new release is. Either you pick up this release or either you ignore the release. You can have this answer question at the end of this session. And thank you everyone who joined us today. And over to you, Taylor. And now you can start sharing your screen and helping us learn what this Kubernetes 1.21 release bring to us. Thank you. Over to you, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Siam. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for making it out today, whether it's your morning, afternoon, or evening. It is a pleasure to have you here. So I've got quite a few slides to go through today, and honestly, the slides are powered by the community. So there are so many things that made it into the Kubernetes 1.21 release, and I'm very excited to walk through some of those highlights with you. I won't be covering absolutely everything that is in the release. There are some things that are absolutely completely up to you to discover and find what might work for you, but definitely going to be covering some of the highlights on that front. So Siam covered it a little bit. Who am I? Who's this person talking to you about these things? My name is Taylor Dolezal. You can find me just about anywhere on the internet as @onlydol. A lot of people will, and you might hear a lot of people say, you don't @ me, if they post things, but please @ me. I love having conversations with people. I love talking things through and solving problems. If we can solve a problem, hey, let's make the world a better place in that way. I'm a senior developer advocate, mostly focused on infrastructure, but as of late, I've started to focus on things like application delivery, developer experience, things that are secure by default, those kinds of concerns. Less tools and more workflows are kind of my focus. And that brings me, so this is what I do during the day, at night and some early mornings, like it is my time now. I'm in Los Angeles. You'll find me as incredibly curious. I feel like that's a good title for many of the things that I do. I work mostly within the SIG release and SIG docs groups for Kubernetes. What a SIG is a special interest group. So if you join the Kubernetes meetings, if you're familiar with that, you might hear that terminology used quite a bit. It's just a special interest group. All of those types of meetings are public, and they are recorded, so you can go reference them on YouTube. It's really, really fantastic to kind of find the right community that works for you. These are two of my favorite communities. SIG Release is focused on actually releasing Kubernetes, and they actually have a special call-out feature in the Kubernetes 1.21 release, which is quite a fun one. I can't wait to get to that one. SIG Docs is mostly focused on the documentation of Kubernetes and the Kubernetes.io site. I work in the blog subproject mostly, and so we take a look at blogs, make sure everything is up to the Kubernetes community standards, and then help get those things published. So if you have any questions during the session, feel free to throw those into chat, or near the end of the session, feel free to unmute yourself, and we can kind of talk things through there. So what actually are we going to be covering today? I'm going to be covering just an overview of Kubernetes 1.21 and maybe an Easter egg or two that you might not know about. After that, I'm going to walk into the major announcements for the Kubernetes 1.21 release. We'll talk about some other updates too, some honorable mentions. Again, we won't go through all of the 51 enhancements and features and additions in 1.21. Otherwise, we'd be here for, I feel like, a few hours. But there's quite a lot. I'll give you some references and resources that you'll be able to take and actually dig into that and see if there's anything that you might find interesting for your workloads. Then I'll move into how to work with Kubernetes 1.21, and we're going to get into a demo there. That's going to be pretty short, and honestly, really, I'm excited to kind of share on that front too, because there's just quite a bit that you don't have access to as soon as Kubernetes releases, right? If you're using something like a managed service on Amazon or Google, Oracle, Azure, whatever it might be, those services might not always have the latest Kubernetes version. So if you do want to check out some of these newer features and get working with those things, that can be difficult on finding a way to do so. I have a solution for you, and we'll talk about that in the demo section. Then we're going to talk about how to get involved. The Kubernetes community is vast. It is sprawling. There are there's always work to be done. And so if you want to get involved, I can I'll dig into that and give some examples of some places that might be interesting to you. Otherwise, I'm always available for questions. Again, feel free to @ me. My Twitter direct messages are open if you have any questions on that front. But yeah, feel free to @ me publicly. That's where I have the most fun working, is in the public space. All right. So, power to the community. What is this? This is actually the title of the Kubernetes 1.21 release. Many people might not know that with each Kubernetes release, it comes with a title, a theme that kind of sum up the effort that all of the people on the release team went through to bring that release to completion. So power to the community is what the 1.21 release is called. This release brings 50 enhancements, up from 43. Sorry, I said 51 earlier. Up from just missing one. So if anyone has a feature, maybe we could get that in there. Kubernetes 1.20 had 43. Kubernetes 1.19 had 34. And of those 50 enhancements, 15 are graduating to stable, which is incredible. 14 are existing features that keep improving. That's either features come in and they're introduced in a staggered way. They come in as alpha and then move to beta and then finally to stable. So when something does go stable, it's a big deal because it's been through a lot of work or iteration or just kind of concepting, people trying things out, etc. Lastly, we have 19 completely new features. Those are entering in the alpha stage. So we know the name of the Kubernetes 1.21 release. It also has a mascot or a logo. So in Kubernetes 1.21, the release lead was Nabarun Pal, and this was the logo and the theme and the mascot that he chose. You can actually go through the Kubernetes, or I believe it's a SIG release repository. And you can actually go in and take a look at all of these images for each of the different releases. It makes for fun trivia, especially around Kubernetes, if you want to kind of take a look at what those might be. In each of the blog posts on Kubernetes IO, you will also find these images. So this is just a fun little Easter egg for you, and fun to see how these change from release to release. Let's start talking some major themes and actually talk about what made it into the Kubernetes 1.21 release. So one that I'm quite excited about are CronJobs. CronJobs graduate to stable. So for it is very much like it sounds. CronJobs are meant for performing regularly scheduled actions such as backups, report generation, and so on. Each of those tasks should be configured to recur indefinitely. So once a day, week, month, any X period of time, you can define the point in time within that interval for the job to start. So really just a big deal that the API has been stabilized and now CronJobs graduate to stable. We see some things that have been around for, some time. CronJobs have been around since 1.8. So you can see that it's been through a lot of iterations and a lot of discussion before getting to this point. In some releases past, we saw the ingress move to stable. It's great to see some of these things that we kind of take for granted in Kubernetes moving to a place of stability and guaranteeing that we'll be able to continue to build upon them and have a good base to build on. Immutable secrets and config maps. So this was something that was kind of talked about and introduced in releases past. Basically, secrets and config maps by default are mutable, which means they can be changed. That's beneficial for pods that are able to consume those changes. And mutating secrets and config maps can cause problems if a bad configuration is pushed for pods that use them. So by being able to make these immutable, you do have some benefits when it comes to scaling up your pods, your deployments, your cluster, as it references these objects. If you can signal that it is immutable, again, it's going to make that experience quite a bit easier because it doesn't have to keep checking for updates or anything of that nature. So a nice enhancement if you can leverage that and make use of that. Next up, we have IPv4, IPv6, dual stack support. So why does this matter? This is a big deal because we're running out of IPv4 addresses. The future is IPv6, and it's difficult to get to that place. I've read a lot of blog posts and done a lot of research around this space, and there are many contexts where the world workloads, machines are just not ready to be able to handle these types of concerns. We still live in very much an IPv4 world. IP addresses are a consumable resource that cluster operators and administrators need to make sure are not exhausted, right? It kind of it defeats the purpose of getting a Kubernetes cluster stood up if you aren't able to actually get any applications deployed or endpoints exposed to the world. In particular, public IPv4 addresses are now scarce, like we were talking about. Having dual stack support enables native IPv6 routing to pods and services while still allowing your cluster to talk IPv4 when needed. Dual stack cluster networking also improves a possible scaling limitation for workloads. So now you could use IPv6 for all of your pods and services internally in your cluster or behind your private network space. If you need to then expose a public IPv4 address, you don't have to use that in as many contexts, which is quite helpful for kind of considering all the moves that we're going to make here in the future. Next up, we have Graceful Node Shutdown. Wish I had this feature and made it easier to go to sleep myself. Graceful Node Shutdown also graduated to beta in this release, and it's going to be available to a much larger group of users. Like we talked about before, with alpha, beta, and stable classifications of these features, it's people when things enter into alpha, people can be a little bit hesitant to kind of start using that feature, and it's not a guarantee it will move into beta or stable. So as things move through this process, they gain a little bit more confidence, but never should it let you, don't hesitate to start using these things. The more you use these things, the more that signals to the community that it's something you want to check out, is something to keep in mind too. But always good to see these things move forward. So the reason that this feature got introduced in the first place was mostly because as machines would shut down, as those nodes would shut down, it didn't always signal to the pods, hey, I'm getting out of here. And then those pods weren't able to make the right steps, considerations, and those lifecycle hooks. Now that has been fixed with Graceful Node Shutdown. A new alpha feature, a new challenger approaches. In Kubernetes 1.21, we have persistent volume health monitor, which allows persistent volumes to be monitored for the health, on their health and marked accordingly if the volumes become unhealthy. Workloads will be able to react to the new health state to protect data from being written or read while that volume is unhealthy. I believe it was 1.19 where there were a lot of storage considerations added. Before, in earlier versions of Kubernetes, it was kind of always thought that you could scale infinitely, you could keep adding storage, and that's especially for your budget and your billing concerns, it's probably not the case, right? Probably don't want to be spending ridiculous amounts of money, and so we need better tools to be able to look at our cluster and actually see what's going on. being able to get features like this is really helpful because, having that graceful node shutdown, having all of these health checks on volumes or our pods, our deployments, all of these things, if we can get that kind of observability in our system, it's going to be quite helpful and prevent us from getting into a bad state where we're writing to a disk that isn't actually available to us. This is a feature that I'm very excited about and something that I've kind of seen take shape in the SIG release space, and that's reducing Kubernetes build maintenance. So previously, Kubernetes had maintained several build systems. That was Bazel, that was Bash, that was some scripts over here, some scripts over there, and it did become very difficult and a big source of friction and complexity for new and current contributors. When we went to debug things in SIG release and taking a look at our tooling, it just wasn't clear, and it really kind of fell back onto, okay, who ran this last successfully? Who can we kind of ask and work with to get a better sense of things? So coming together as a community over the last release cycle, a lot of work has been put in to simplify that build process and standardize on native Go build tools. So getting rid of Bazel, getting rid of some other things, and focusing on the release tools called KREL, Kubernetes release, KREL is where that comes from. And this allows us to work better with the community, get a better maintenance type of support, and lower that barrier of entry for newer contributors. All right. So some major changes, really deprecations that are coming up now in 1.21. The biggest one is the PodSecurityPolicy Deprecation. There's a lot to unpack here, but pod security policies, if you're familiar with them, if you've used them, they're a great Kubernetes native tool to restrict what deployments can do, like limiting execution to a set of users, or accessing resources like the network or volumes. This has been in beta since 1.8. You'll notice a pattern there. A lot of things have been here since 1.8, and we're kind of really starting to kind of work through them now. This feature has some serious limitations that block its GA, its stable release. Right now it has a dual authorization model, which weakens security. It can't be enabled by default, and the API has grown with lots of inconsistencies. So what's next? Honestly, there are a lot of options. The biggest one that's being proposed right now is using OPA, the Open Policy Agent, and the Gatekeeper project to instantiate how you actually go about authorizing and authenticating and working within those flows inside of your cluster. The team is developing a new built-in mechanism to help limit pod privileges, so you don't need to add something else in, with a working title of PSP replacement policy. So the team's plan for this new mechanism is to cover key pod security policy use cases and greatly improve ergonomics and maintainability. But currently, you can also kind of augment this too. There's two contexts really, is being able to work within Kubernetes so you don't have to add on some things to your cluster. But if you're okay with adding some things on, you can add on, Gatekeeper with Open Policy Agent. You can add on Falco. There are a bunch of tools within this space that can help you out if you're concerned with security and are okay with kind of operating outside of the PSP space, the Kubernetes native space. Next up is the TopologyKeys Deprecation. So this was introduced in Kubernetes 1.17 and really was just for more efficient network routing. What's happening is there are two features that were added that kind of help to replace this and make this a better experience for everyone that's using Kubernetes. Topology keys have been replaced with a way to implement topology-aware routing called topology-aware hints. Topology-aware hints are an alpha feature in 1.21, and I'll share some resources if you want to read more up on this one. Some other updates, I'll kind of fly through these as we move forward. So we had 3 big deals graduate to stable status. That's endpoint slice, The new endpoint slice API splits endpoints into several endpoint slice resources. This solves many problems in the current API that are related to big endpoints objects. The new API is also designed to support other future releases like multiple IPs per pod. Add syscontrol support. So since Kubernetes 1.4, it's been possible to interact with the Linux syscalls, system controls service to tune specific OS parameters according to the needs of the deployed pods. What graduates to stable now is a change on how that configuration is declared in pods. Before annotations were used, now fields are used. And again, I'll share out some resources here at the end as far as if you want to dig into these and kind of see, how to actually declare these things. Lastly, pod disruption budgets. Introduced in Kubernetes 1.4 and beta since 1.5, pod disruption budget finally graduates to stable. Fantastic. With this API, you can define a min available number of replicas for a pod. If you try to voluntarily disrupt a pod in a way that violates min available value, it won't be deleted, which is quite helpful if you're looking to do some chaos engineering on your cluster. Some other notable feature updates. The external client Go credential providers is now beta in 1.21. Structured logging, which is something I'm always happy to nerd out about. Really excited to kind of see that consistency in logging across Kubernetes. Graduating to beta in 1.22, which is going to be great. And lastly, TTL after finished cleanup for jobs and pods, graduating to beta in 1.21. All right. So some of you, it was mentioned in the description for this session, but editors picks. Who's the editor? Where, what are these picks? This I took from the Sysdig blog post. There are two places that I go to when it comes to looking for news about new releases for Kubernetes, aside from working with the team. So in this release, I've been working on Kubernetes in the Kubernetes space since 1.14, and the release cycle does get wild and it does demand a lot of you. So I've sat out for a few releases, and 1.22 is one. So I'm very excited to kind of read the blog posts and check out Sysdig's blog post on that front. So these are all from Sysdig's blog post, in some things that are worth knowing as well that weren't mentioned in the community. So first up, we have Memory Manager, which is useful for applications where memory optimization is key for performance, like packet processing with DPDK databases or virtual machines. The new Memory Manager also acts as a hint provider for Topology Manager. So you can see kind of all of these management systems coming in and giving us more observability and more telemetry about what's going on with our cluster. Prefer nominated node. So this is really helpful when scheduling a pod. You're able to kind of look for the best place to put that work, to put that job. When you can specify CPU and memory concerns. You can label things, but this gives you kind of more selection on that front in terms of allocating that out. Indexed job. So this makes it easier to schedule highly parallelizable jobs known as embarrassingly parallel. I just found that hilarious to put in there. A great feature name. So when using completion mode indexed, each pod gets a different index in the range 0 to completions, -1. 0 to completions, -1. The job will be considered complete when there is one successfully completed pod for each index. And then finally, network policy port ranges. Currently, when defining a network policy, you've got to specify all those ports in range 1 by 1. And then by using this feature gate, you'll be able to define all ports as a range, which is quite helpful, especially when I'm working in I'm always happy when I can do that working with Terraform, being able to, instead of specify each of those ports in a singular way, being able to specify a range is always quite easier. But keep in mind that in order to use that feature, your CNI plugins do have to support that as well. All right. Any questions on that front? I think that is pretty much the bulk of all of the of all of the features I'm going to be covering today. Oh, I did see one question in the chat. What would you recommend for getting started contributing to Kubernetes? Tips for documentation, other developers to get involved. So Esteban, I will cover that here in just a little bit, actually. Fantastic question. I have a quick demo for you, and then I'll jump into kind of how to get involved and the different areas that might be of interest to you. So hold tight, and I will absolutely answer that question here shortly. Okay. Any other questions? Feel free to throw them in the chat. Interrupt me. Always more than happy to kind of get back to things. All right, so let's get this get these slides out of here. I'm going to go ahead and show you really quick what we're going to be talking through today, as well as some resources that might be helpful to you. So I'll actually go through this first. So in the chat, I'm going to paste these, all three of these links actually. Why stick with one when we can go with all three of them? Okay, so what the heck are these links? I'll tell you. So first off is the Kubernetes blog. And what this is like we had talked about, this is what the community works on. At the end of a Kubernetes release, and as the Kubernetes release is going public and getting shipped out, the team inside of SIG release, the release team, there's a communications team. And this is one of the things that they do is work on this blog post throughout the cycle. And so they keep track of what's interesting, what you might want to know. And so this is a blog post that's very much in line with the community and focused on the things that were a big deal during the release. You can keep on scrolling down here and you can see the release logo. You can get the backstory. And it just is, it's really a story. It's really fantastic. There are other blog posts out there too, like Sysdig, that kind of delve more authoritatively into each of the different features, and they do an incredible job. Sysdig is one of my favorites in terms of kind of outlining, what is this thing, though you can always jump in and take a look at the caps. So if we wanted to take a look at the nominated node, they provide links to be able to go in. You can read a cap too, but in some cases it can be a little bit dry and it can be difficult to understand the context. And so I do like pairing that together with Sysdig's article and kind of getting through, what's actually going on within the release. Makes for wonderful reference material. Lastly, our demo today. So I don't have a repository to share with you because this is a little bit more straightforward, and there is some documentation on this front. But if you haven't heard of Kind, maybe you should try it, being kind. Just joking. The Kind stands for Kubernetes in Docker, and it is a really wonderful tool to be able to use for testing things out, spinning up a local cluster. Personally, I don't use Minikube anymore. I do have Docker for Mac on this machine, but I use Kind mostly for setting up all of my test clusters. Let me go ahead and open. Where the heck are my windows here? I'm on Mac and looking for Windows. How funny is that? Okay, here we go. So this is all you need to be able to spin up a Kind cluster. So if I want to emulate a Kubernetes cluster with one control plane node and then 3 worker nodes, I can do that just based off of this YAML document. You can use Kind to just create a cluster right out of the gate. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And you don't need a YAML file. In that case, though, you're just going to get one control plane node and one worker node. So let's go ahead and stand this up. It is literally this easy to start using Kind. For those of you that already know about this, sorry to keep it dry. You've seen this a few times, I'm sure. But this is one of the easiest ways to start working with a later Kubernetes release. I can, in here, specify which release I want to. So by default, it's taking 1.21.1 right now. But we can, if I wanted to use 1.19, I could. There are different ways to specify that. You would use the SHA-256 value and be able to specify that in here, which is in the documentation if you want to check out the Kind link that I pasted into chat. So we can see that this goes through, kind goes through each of the different steps to creating and instantiating your Kubernetes cluster. And it typically doesn't take that long. It takes like maybe 1 minute, minute and a half. And then we also have these wonderful emojis that actually match up to what we've specified too. So if you did have only 2 nodes, you would only see 2 of these packages next to this step, which is just kind of a fun little feature. One thing to note is that when it comes to networking, that's about the only place I can imagine that you might run into some issues. Besides Kubernetes, it is a sprawling and a giant place. So when it comes to the networking concerns, you might need something like Metal LB, that project, to actually connect to your host machine's IP space and creating things like ingresses. If you don't need to use ingresses, then honestly, you should be fine just using this directly. So, okay, wonderful. So now we have our Kubernetes cluster up and running. And this will switch to, I believe this switches directly to that context. So we'll go ahead and see. If I go and do kubectl get nodes, I was using shorthand there. I've aliased kube control to K, and Kubernetes has some shorthand too. So if I wanted to get that, I could do that, type a little bit less, and get that exact same thing. So as you can see, we have Kubernetes 1.21. And now we could test any of those features that we spoke about just a little bit ago, and quite easily. We don't have to wait for our favorite cloud to go and get 1.21. We can actually start testing out those workloads and seeing if those things work as expected right here. So Kind is a fantastic project. Ben the Elder is somebody that's a friend of the show, a very, very fond friend, and always happy to kind of see all the efforts that are being put forth on this project. But definitely recommend checking this out if you haven't yet. And yeah, and that concludes our demo. I didn't have anything specific to 1.21, but definitely recommend checking this out. If you try this out, please let me know. If you run into any issues, please let me know on that front. All right. And then lastly, we'll move into the remainder of our discussion and getting involved. First, I'm going to check and make sure if there are any questions or anything like that about the Kubernetes 1.21 features, about the Kind project. If you have any questions on that front, feel free to throw those into chat. So, Esteban, you ready? Let's talk about getting involved with Kubernetes. So, go ahead. I just heard the mic.
Oh, sorry, that was me laughing. I'm beginning to mute myself.
Oh, no problems. I like the feedback. Yeah, it's difficult when you're not in person. I like it. Thank you, Sasha.
I love the birds. I love the natural nature bird sounds that you've got going. I don't know how you do it, but it sounds so real.
Yeah, it's just a laugh track. Fantastic. Yeah, so Kubernetes getting involved. What is this? So this is a spark. This is passionate people working on a project. This is how Kubernetes feels to me, and people I've talked to, many others as well. Finding that spark and finding that thing that you're passionate about is so important, and Kubernetes maintains that. It doesn't burn you out quickly. When working within the Kubernetes space, it's encouraged for people to step down when they've taken on too much or major life change happens. It's okay. You don't have to do everything. And the realistic expectation of that is something that I think is a defining feature of the Kubernetes community. Encouraging people to kind of, push themselves, but not to a place that's going to be, ultimately harmful to them. If you want to get started working on Kubernetes, I recommend taking a look at the Kubernetes Shadow Survey. So right now we are in the middle of the 1.22 release, but as that completes, the Kubernetes Shadow Survey will come out again for 1.23. That's the place that I got started with Kubernetes 1.14, I started working on the communications team as a shadow. And the way that this works is you start in the Kubernetes release space as a shadow. And so you kind of, you have a lead, you work with them, and there are many different roles on the release team. There are people working on documentation, communications, enhancements. There are so many different roles within that team, and we have that all defined in our handbook. I can show you where to get that a little bit later, or feel free to at me on that front. But one of the easier ways to get started working with the community, if you want to focus on the actual concerns of releasing Kubernetes. If that doesn't really sound like you, you might be interested in SIG docs as a great place to start if you don't know where you want to start. SIG docs gives you a wonderful cross section into all of the different SIGs and kind of like, do I care about authentication, networking, storage, cloud providers? What might make sense to me? And I think this is a great place to get started because it doesn't require that you need to, know this ridiculous amount of code to rewrite the scheduler algorithm, or, that's when I started working in Kubernetes, that was my thought, right? Like open source, that sounds horrific. I don't know if I could make mistakes in public or work in public like that. But the reality is that's how a lot of people work. And we do make mistakes, and that's okay. We learn from them. I think we have this opinion of, if you, it's not a mistake if it's something that you can learn from and then kind of create a better future with, then it's worth, making a mistake or something like that. So don't let that hold you back. SIG docs is a great place if you do want to try to get started or take a look at some documentation, see how different processes within the community work. Really, really a great place to get started. Another great place to get started is SIG ContribX is what it's called. Contributor experience is what that is the full title. That's a wonderful place if you don't know where you want to start. You first want to get a sense of the community and the overall culture. So you can also join into these SIG calls on YouTube and kind of like, I recommend taking a look at the already recorded videos on YouTube to kind of get a sense as well, but feel free to join the meetings if that makes sense. And you can kind of just hear people's, what they're passionate about, some of the things that are going on within the community and how people are getting involved. The SIG contributor experience group has also created a contributor site and kind of documenting out some of the more common things that you might do within the Kubernetes space and getting started on that front. So Kubernetes is serious work, but make sure you're having fun. You can't work at your best when you feel like the work that you're volunteering on is an obligation. Again, I think that I've just had so many positive experiences personally in the Kubernetes space, and they've made some, not as fun moments in my career that much more fun. It became something I really looked forward to doing and still look forward to doing. There's a ton of work that needs to be done, and everybody's just so helpful. They want to enable you to be able to learn. They want to be able to teach you these things so that you can make your own explorations, your own hypotheses you can go and discover, which is just incredibly validating and rewarding. And with that, I'd like to draw to a close and move into any questions that anyone might have. I can see there's another comment in the chat. I'll get to that. But yeah, please feel free to ask any questions on that front. I'd be more than happy to answer. Esteban asks.
Question, but I'll wait until you finish with that one. I'll wait.
Yeah. Esteban asks, any tools, plugins you recommend from the top of your terminal VS Code? Really quick on that front, let me close this presentation. So I have a few, I think, honestly, my favorite thing about VS Code that I have right now, I have a few things. I just recently installed Music Time and Code Time, so I can actually control Spotify from my, it's a huge deal, right? You got to have something to do while you're coding and taking a look at YAML. I really love these plugins because they'll show how long I've worked on various projects. And then it uses, Music Time uses some AI to suggest some good Spotify lists. That's really good. I do like live share for a lot of the work that I do. I'm working with people. And so being able to share out a link and kind of like, what are you looking at? No, it's not what I see, goes away when you start to use things like live share. And then the typeface that I use too Operator is the name of this typeface. It is paid. It was, I think it was like 200 USD, which sounds steep, but it's a typeface I've used for about, I want to say 7 years. And I just really enjoy it. Makes looking at text nice and easy, but you can always use things like Firamano, Open Sans. There's a whole bunch of different things. I know, I think that I'm blanking on the one that JetBrains released too, but definitely worth checking that out as well if you want some similar ones on that front. But that's what I can think of. And then would love to go to you, Sasha.
Yeah, Taylor, so I hope I'm understanding this feature, what it's meant to do, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So at the moment, I'm working on a big project where we have to migrate a lot of Spring Boot applications into Kubernetes, right? And the memory manager part was quite interesting. Is this something where you can guarantee sort of a quality of service around those Java applications? Am I understanding that correctly with this new feature?
That's correct. Yeah, there was a lot of talk around different types of workloads being onboarded with that feature directly. And then I think even in, I think Sysdig talked a little bit about that in that blog post too, and kind of like welcoming in more intensive workloads, some AI workloads, and kind of research workloads on that front. But absolutely, and I think that it's gonna, I'm really curious to see how that space evolves. There are, tools like Kubeflow and some others within that space as well, but being able to, just being able to instrument things like that are going to be helpful in kind of seeing if that's a good direction for the project.
Yeah, so that's really awesome to know. So it just means for your production environments, you can guarantee some type of service, because I know that Java applications can be notorious about chewing up your RAM or memory usage. So it's nice that you can guarantee some sort of quality of service, and kind of sleep easy at night. Which is a great feature.
I can't agree more. It's I remember when, what was it? I think it was Java 8 in the JVM. When working on a previous company, there were a lot of Java workloads that we were putting onto Kubernetes and starting to work on. And we ran into this interesting bug where the JVM would look at the entire machine that it had available to it and basically said like it wouldn't respect the pod limits and resource constraints that we put on that. So it would be like, you give it 25% of the CPU and it would think it had 100. And so, that was
a weird thing. Okay, that's so awesome to know, because that's a really great feature then. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Yeah. And curious if you have any feedback on that front. Always happy to hear on your journeys there, and kind of getting you in touch with any groups if you want to talk more with them on that front too. So
awesome.
Thanks. Please at me.
Awesome. Such a good session, eh?
Yes, so I think.
Thank you.
So I think before we wrap it up, the whole discussion, I think you really enjoyed the session, because I think it's around 7 a.m. from Toller, and he woke up very early in the morning. That's really appreciated for sharing his knowledge and energy about that. I think there's some of the people asking about the contribution guide. I think you go to the Twitter, and I think following the Kubernetes contributor, follow the Kubernetes contributor handle. So they give you the link to go back to the shadow release and apply for the shadow release if you want to contribute to the Kubernetes 1.23, because 1.22 is already, I think, scheduled, and people are, I think, finalizes for the Kubernetes 1.22. But Kubernetes 1.23, if you want to contribute to that, go ahead and follow the Kubernetes contributor handle, #1 place for go to in. And also, I think you follow on the Taylor Dolezal at only Joel at Twitter. He always shares these kind of things. He's a very supportive person. I personally know him. And also you can go to the Google group docs and Google group, and always join the new community members there. So I think these are the 2 places for you to be able to jump into the Kubernetes 1.23 release if you want to. So these are the contribution tips for that. And for the next, I think the 2 big points for the Kubernetes 1.21 release, that's, I think you already mentioned. One, I think like about that is Kubernetes persistent health volume. And I think you can draw some points what it is, because people are really interesting to know, because the persistent volume, the storage space is very hot at right now in the Kubernetes. So can you draw points what it is, and you can draw points why we're gonna bother about this new change in Kubernetes health monitor for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to storage, really just all of Kubernetes, it doesn't work well unless you have that ability to instrument it properly, right? So as things, as nodes fall off, as pods stop returning that healthy status, it's useful to know about that so we can make changes based on that information. And so by being able to take a look at those volumes and see if they're healthy or are they ready, is vastly important. You could get around some concerns. So like if you're, let's say we're in AWS, say that we set up a Kubernetes cluster, you in previous Kubernetes releases, if you're running something like Jenkins, say, I had run into many contexts where I would spin Jenkins up and then that pod might go down and then it would get rescheduled on another node, but then it would have to move that volume to attach to that. And so sometimes that would take up to 4 minutes and the teams were just so excited to have to wait for their builds to run, right? it's so I'm being sarcastic, but it's, people hated it. We could get around that with things like Rook or Ceph and kind of figuring out some ways around that. But that requires a lot of work, right? It requires a lot of tuning too, just to kind of get that. You could either tell your team to wait 4 minutes, which is not ideal, or you can spin up and learn this brand new piece to put into your Kubernetes cluster, which is good, but it's also not ideal if you don't have the time to do that. And that's not what you've planned for, right? So by being able to have these features right in Kubernetes natively and instrument those volumes and your storage and make sure everything is as you expect it to be, that kind of gives you that advantage. So that's kind of that's my attempt to paint a little bit more of the picture on why some of these things are making it into Kubernetes and when the best time is to use them.
Especially during a demo. Making your higher ups wait for 4 minutes is not a good idea.
they love that, yeah.
Yeah,
like, time to market.
Yeah, your
later.
business people are like watching. What the hell are these guys doing? They don't know what they're doing. It's so slow.
that's my favorite XKCD comic is the still compiling. Oh, okay, that's fine. It's like waiting for my pod to start. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and you're like sweating there. Your whole team is sweating there because you're the guy presenting. They're all looking at you like, why didn't you check this out?
makes for very long demos, I gotta say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a very nice feature, that, and it's a great question there, Basim.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I think before I let Trailer to go, I think the one people are talking about all the time, the PodSecurityPolicy Deprecation. And we already talked about, there are, I think one alternative is OPA Gatekeeper that works not in Kubernetes, but in the AWS, Azure, and all the kind of setup. But I think there's a learning curve involved with OPA Gatekeeper because you learn a new language called Rago. And that's, I think, painstaking for many of the people. So I think the new tool called the Kyverno that works natively with Kubernetes, but it works just with Kubernetes, not elsewhere. But I think if you want to go for that route, for the Kyverno, you don't need to learn any new language because it's YAML based, already Kubernetes native. And if you want to choose the route for OPA, you have to learn the regular language as well. So I think you draw some point, Taylor, what happened to the PSP, and I think it's finally going to deprecate it in 1.25. Can you show us some steps on some best production strategies, what people are going to do about this deprecation?
Great question. So absolutely, to all of your points as well. And with OPA, I'm bullish on that. That's my personal take, and so I'm really bullish on kind of what OPA has planned for the future. They've graduated the CNCF process, and so there's a lot of that gives me a lot of confidence in that project. But like you said, and like I had said before, do you have the time to learn this thing? It is a massive undertaking to kind of adopt a new tool. And it's like it is kind of like betting. Will this continue to be used? Is the community going to continue to adopt it and things like that? We have strong signals that that's the case, but you never know. It could always be raining. The weather forecast isn't always true. And so that's definitely something to consider. But in terms of moving to what's next, we do have a couple options, like you said. I think that there were a few other projects mentioned in the community as well. And then the group that is deprecating pod security policy, it's just deprecated right now. It's not removed. So like was mentioned, you do have until 125. For the team is also aware of that, and they're trying to look at some other concerns on how you can adopt those things natively within Kubernetes. So they're currently, it is TBD right now, but they are working through those concerns to try to capture all of the things that you were able to do with your PSPs, and actually make that Kubernetes native experience too. So more will come on that front, but there is a working group currently looking at, or the project currently looking at making sure all those features are still available and putting them into the right concerns and making them more secure, and kind of getting rid of some of the problems that existed with pod security policies as well. So all that to say, stay tuned. There should be a couple solutions and proposed ideas on that front soon.
Yes, definitely. I think everyone want to get involved in that. You can send out a tweet on me at CloudNativeBoy and at OnlyDole@Taylor. We try to connect with the person who are involved in the PSP deprecation and all the project school behind that. And I think if you are interested to learn about Kyverno, we have you covered on Cloud Native Islamabad. We have did one session to show you how you can get started with Kyverno, and you don't need to learn any other languages. And we try to connect with OPA people as well, how they can help you in this way. But I really appreciated the Taylor, and I think this has been a pleasure talking to you about Kubernetes 1.21 release. And we try to get in touch with you in future. Anytime a new release came up, we have a live demo session with Taylor on these new releases, because he's active on these kind of things. And he also the HashiCorp person. Might we try to catch up with some other sessions on cloud native things happening inside HashiCorp. And stay tuned, stay healthy. Hope you already enjoyed the session today. Thank you, Taylor. I really appreciated your time. You spent time and shared your knowledge. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Stay safe and stay healthy.
See you, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Talk to you.